Imagine a world where the people at the very top, the wealthiest 1%, the political class, the figures who shape policy and control narratives, are connected to acts so disturbing that most people would rather dismiss them as impossible. For years, that idea was treated as absurd. But with new evidence emerging, records resurfacing, and past assumptions quietly collapsing, the question isn't whether the theory was crazy anymore. It's whether it was dismissed too early. Here's the full story. This case starts in the year 2016, during the U.S. presidential election. That's the moment everyone remembers. But it's not where the behavior began. It's just where the paper trail leaked. WikiLeaks released tens of thousands of emails belonging to John Podesta, campaign chairman for Hillary Clinton. Those emails were authenticated by multiple agencies. That is not in dispute. No one credible has ever claimed the emails were fake. What became disputed was what people thought they meant. Most of the emails were boring: scheduling, logistics, political chatter. But mixed into them were messages that used food terms in ways that didn't read like normal conversation. Pizza, pasta, cheese, hot dogs, handkerchiefs, maps. Quantities that made no sense in context. No email explicitly mentioned children, trafficking, or abuse. That is a fact, and I won't pretend otherwise. The theory that followed was built on interpretation, not confession. People online began asking whether this language was coded, not because they wanted a conspiracy, but because coded language is a documented feature of criminal networks, including trafficking rings. That's a matter of record in law enforcement training materials. The problem was that once that question was asked publicly, the conversation stopped being analytical and became radioactive. The name PizzaGate was attached to it, and that name did a lot of work. It collapsed a complicated set of questions into something that sounded ridiculous. That mattered later. As the emails were examined, attention turned to a specific location mentioned multiple times: Comet Ping Pong, a pizza restaurant in Washington, D.C. On its own, that meant nothing. Restaurants get named in emails all the time. But then people looked at who owned it. James Alefantis, a restaurant owner who, according to GQ magazine, was listed as one of the most powerful people in Washington. That's unusual. Not criminal, just unusual. Alefantis had close social and political connections. He had a public Instagram account at the time that included images of children, art involving children, and captions that many found disturbing given the context. Even debunking outlets later admitted they could not identify who the children were. They did not accuse him of crimes. They acknowledged the content was strange and unexplained. Comet Ping Pong also functioned as a performance venue. It hosted artists and bands with deliberately provocative, sexual, or occult-themed material. Again, not illegal, but context matters, especially when a business markets itself as family-friendly. Another thread in the emails involved Marina Abramovich, a performance artist known for spirit cooking, a form of conceptual art involving ritualistic symbolism. She emailed Tony Podesta, John's brother, inviting him to a spirit cooking dinner. Spirit cooking's real. Abramovich has documented it herself. The invitation is real. What is unknown is who attended and what occurred privately. Around this time, people began pointing out symbols, spirals, triangles, logos used by nearby businesses. Some matched symbols shown in a 2007 FBI training document about imagery sometimes used by pedophile networks. That document is real. Whether those symbols were intentionally used or coincidental is unknown. When one nearby restaurant changed its logo after public attention, it raised suspicion for some and looked like damage control to others. Both interpretations are plausible. Neither is provable. Then, the story collapsed violently. On December 4th, 2016, a man named Edgar Welch entered Comet Ping Pong armed with firearms. He fired shots into the restaurant. No one was injured. He surrendered peacefully. He later said he'd come to investigate the allegations himself. He was sentenced to prison. Media coverage framed the entire subject as a dangerous hoax that led to real-world violence. That framing stuck. What did not happen is just as important as what did. There was no comprehensive investigation into the broader claims. No formal review of the emails by law enforcement to clarify their meaning. No public accounting of the social media material that had raised concerns. The case ended with Welch, not with answers. For years, that was the end of it. PizzaGate became shorthand for internet insanity. The central argument against it wasn't that every detail had been disproven, but that the idea itself was impossible. The belief was simple. Powerful elites do not operate organized sexual abuse networks in plain sight. If they did, we would know. Then came Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein's case is not theory. It is fact. He was arrested, charged, and convicted for sex crimes involving minors. He maintained connections to politicians, royalty, financiers, academics, and intelligence-linked figures across multiple countries. He operated for decades. He was protected repeatedly by institutional failures. What the Epstein case changed was the plausibility landscape. It shattered the argument that elite abuse networks were unthinkable. They were no longer hypothetical. They were proven. As more Epstein-related documents were released, people noticed something familiar. Communications that used vague, euphemistic language, references to shared experiences that outsiders wouldn't understand. Food references appeared again. Pizza, drinks, gifts. I'm not saying this proves a code. I am saying it proves that powerful abusers do not communicate plainly. They don't need to. This is where I slowed down, kid, because this is where people get sloppy. The Epstein files do not prove PizzaGate was correct in its specific claims. They do not prove Comet Ping Pong was involved in trafficking. They do not retroactively validate every interpretation of the Podesta emails. Anyone telling you that is lying or selling something. What Epstein does confirm is narrower and more uncomfortable. He confirms that disbelief is a shield. He confirms that proximity to power can suppress scrutiny. He confirms that institutions will avoid looking too closely if the cost of looking is too high. So, what remains unknown? We still do not know what certain emails meant. No one involved has explained them publicly. We do not know why those explanations were never demanded. We do not know who the children in certain images were and why that ambiguity was allowed to persist. We do not know why no independent investigation was conducted when the allegations first surfaced. We do not know whether coincidences were truly coincidences or merely dismissed as such. And here's the part that keeps me awake. If PizzaGate was entirely false, the correct response would have been transparency, clear explanations, documentations, investigation. Instead, the response was ridicule, censorship, and silence. That doesn't prove guilt, but it proves fear of scrutiny. Why does this matter now? Because Epstein showed us that the world we thought was impossible is not. Because future allegations will be dismissed using the same playbook. Because if you poison the well once, no one drinks from it again. Someone wants this forgotten because remembering it forces a harder question. Not, was PizzaGate real? But, what kind of crimes are we trained not to believe? I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm asking you to notice what was never answered. Keep this file. If they take it down, you'll know why. If this made you uncomfortable, good. It should. Because this isn't the only place where power, money, and silence overlap. There's another, different location, same patterns. A place built on childhood, nostalgia, and smiles, with stories buried deep underneath it. Disney World.